Howdy folks, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. So a while back I promised to make a video about sighting in your rifle. This is a very key process if you're going to be using your rifle for any kind of practical applications, especially self-defense, combat, zombie apocalypse, or just good old-fashioned hunting. Now, as you can see, I just put a couple rounds down range. We're out here at one of our favorite public ranges at the 100-yard mark, and this is a perfect place to sight in this particular setup because, rule of thumb, easy thing to remember, if you have a scope, always zero it for 100 yards because, reason for that, almost every scope on the market is specifically designed to be zeroed at 100 yards because a lot of these scopes, such as this LPVO, this is a Vortex 1-8 Strike Eagle, they actually have reticles. And the reticle is the thing you see when you look through a sight. You know, on a red dot it would be the dot, on a scope it would be the crosshairs, or in this case the donut of death as I like to call it. That's a horseshoe shape with a dot in the middle. But on scopes like this, underneath that dot, there's actually what's called a ladder. That ladder has graduated markings for 300, 400, 500, 600, and so on and so forth, as well as windage markers. That's dots out on either side of that ladder, which form almost a Christmas tree shape. Now that's very, very useful if you're engaging, say, a moving target, or on a day like today when it's a little bit windy. I've actually used these dots when it was very, very windy. I was at a place called Lead Farm up in Versailles, engaging targets up to 500 yards with this exact weapon. So it's pretty important to make sure that your gun is shooting exactly where you want it to shoot and exactly how you want it to shoot. You know what? I've talked enough. Let's go see how I did. Alrighty guys, here we are downrange at the target, and as you can see, that first group wasn't very good. Now there's 6 holes here because I went ahead and shot another group just to show the contrast between that and what I wanted to be. So I was aiming here, of course, for the bullseye, and most of my shots went to the left and low. Yeah, I had a flyer up here, but you always get one of those. Now, what do you think I need to do here? Well, what you really should do is adjust up and to the right. And you see all these little squares on these handy-dandy MDC targets, which the Missouri Department of Conservation is so very generous to provide at these public ranges. Now, each one of these squares is an inch square. So, say this hole, that is 1 inch to the left from the bullseye. So I'd have to adjust 1 inch to the right, but even further for this hole, and even further for these two. Now, as you can see, these are pretty tightly grouped. That's about 1.5 inch spread-ish, you know, being a little generous. That's actually pretty consistent accuracy for an AR-15 at this distance. Now, your match-grade guns, they're going to be much better, and especially if you have really good quality ammunition, you'll be cutting holes every time. So, let's go back there and let's do some adjusting. Alrighty folks, here we are back at the bench, and we're ready to make our adjustments to try to move those shots where we want them to go. Now, just now when we went down to verify the target, we noticed that my shots are going about 1 inch or so to the left, maybe 1.5 inches, and about 1 inch or so low from where I want it to be, being the bullseye on the target. Now, how exactly do we adjust our scopes to be able to move the shots to where we want them to go from where they're already landing? Well, let's get into that. First off, of course, you always make sure this weapon is unloaded. Remove the magazine, work that charging handle a couple times, verify that chamber is empty. Now we are good to go. So, to adjust our scopes, and almost every scope on the market is going to be like this, you're going to have 2 knobs. In this case I have 3 because this one on the left-hand side is actually for the illumination. This is an illuminated reticle scope. But, to make the adjustments I want to make, we're going to look at these 2 right here. There's going to be one on the right-hand side of the scope and one on top of the scope from the shooter's perspective. The one on the top of the scope is always for your elevation. That is your up and down adjustments. And if you remove these caps on here, and these caps are in place just to protect the knobs in there because sometimes these knobs can be very, very sensitive depending on what kind of scope you have. You don't want these snagging or bumping up against something and throwing your shots off. As you can see, I don't know if you can see it very well, lots of little numbers on there. The way you adjust these is, in this case, I can just adjust it by hand, but sometimes you'll need a coin or the rim of a casing or a screwdriver or something like that. What you want to do is you want to get in there and you want to adjust them ever so slightly. Most of the time you'll be able to feel and hear a little click. That's called a tactile and audible adjustment. Now, the reason for those clicks is most of these scopes, just about every scope on the market, I mean, it's going to vary between styles. There's MOA and there's mil-dot, but in this case it's an MOA adjustment. MOA stands for minute of angle. Now, in a military parlance and for most competition shooters, minute of angle is 1 inch at 100 yards. So that means for every one of these tiny little squares that we talked about on our MDC targets, each one of these little squares is 1 MOA. That is 1 inch at 100 yards. That is the basic adjustment for most scopes on the market. Now, your basic red dots or reflex sights, things of that nature, they'll usually have a 0.5 to 1 MOA adjustment per click. A scope like this is a little more sensitive. This is actually a 1/4 MOA per click. That means every time I click one of these knobs, that is a 1/4 inch at 100 yards. And if you do a little basic math, you can adjust this to whatever range you want. That's one reason why scopes are always 0 to 100 yards. If you are, say, right here at 100 yards, one of these clicks is a 1/4 MOA. If I go to 200 yards, you double it. You go to 300 yards, you triple it, and so on and so forth. You got to do the math in your head to be able to properly put your shots on target. So, as I said, your top knob is always the elevation adjustment, that being your up and down adjustment. You go here to the right-hand side, this is going to be your windage adjustment. That is your left to right adjustment. Now, a minute ago I talked about all the little mil dots that are inside some of these scopes. Sometimes those can actually help you, because if your scope is dead on target at 100 yards on a calm day with not much wind, kind of like today, then you have a baseline to go off of. If you know where your shots are hitting on a calm day at a known distance when you are not under stress, now you can actually adjust with a little experience where you want your bullet to go and where you want to adjust according to the wind, according to your elevation, whether you're higher than your target, lower than your target, the wind's blowing to the left or right, how much is it blowing, things of that nature. Now that I've gone through all of that, let's make some adjustments. And here we are getting a closer look at these two knobs. Now, as I said, these can get pretty complicated depending on what kind of scope you have. Now, a lot of red dots will have something similar to this, but it will, of course, be a lot simpler, because red dots don't have nearly the level of fine adjustment that scopes have. I'll make another video on red dots pretty soon. So, as I said, we want to go about 1.5 inches to the right from where we were before. Now, as I said, these are 1/4 MOA adjustments. So, I don't know if you guys can hear this or not, but I am going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. And as you see right here, usually these have an arrow on here somewhere saying go this way to go right, and on top it'll have go this way to go up. That's just very simple, idiot-proof instructions that even somebody like me can follow. Let you know if you go this way, you're going to go that direction. If you go the other way, you're going to go the other direction. Sometimes these scopes, especially the cheaper ones, don't have that, and it can really, really throw you off unless you really get to know your equipment. So as you can see, I just adjusted this, what should be 1 full MOA to the right of where I was shooting a minute ago. We also want to go about 1 inch up. So what we're going to do here, going to make the same adjustment. Now I'm holding the camera with one hand, so I'm going to have to do this like so. Now again, 1, 2, 3, 4. That was 1 full MOA up. So we have now adjusted 1 full MOA up and to the right. That should put us on target for exactly where we want to be. Now, of course, you can repeat this as often as possible. I like to do 3-shot iterations. That way I absolutely confirm that I didn't just have 1 lucky shot and 2 flyers. You want to make sure that you are putting multiple rounds on target exactly the way you want them to be. Let's see how we did. Alrighty, so here we are down at the target. Now, as we said before, this was my previous string of fire. This is 2 3-shot groups. My best group was over here, 1.5 inches to the left and about 1.5 inches low. Now, after making those adjustments back there, how did we do? Oh yeah, that's what you want to see. Now, folks, bear in mind that I am using a 16-inch CMMG. Nothing really too super awesome when it comes to barrels, nothing too super fancy, and I'm just using Winchester White Box 55 grain M193. That is the cheapest practice ammo you can buy. When it comes to shooting, guys, this is what you can do with the basic off-the-shelf practice ammo. You start buying the really high-end hunting stuff, the really high-end match grade stuff, these holes will be touching each other. I have seen guys shoot groups at this distance with really high-end ammo and really high-end guns where they put all 3 rounds basically through the same hole. That is impressive. Also, let's give another big shout out to the MDC for providing not only awesome public ranges, but these awesome targets free of charge. One of the few things that I'm glad my tax dollars go to. So guys, if you have your weapon properly zeroed in those few simple steps that I showed you back there at the desk, you can go from this to this, and you can do this every time at any distance with any weapon. Well, there you have it, guys. The quick and dirty, simple, easy breezy guide to zeroing in your rifle at any distance, your preferred distance with your preferred ammo. Now, of course, this can be adjusted in any number of different ways. You can adjust your gun to a specific kind of ammo. Guys out there that I know actually adjust their gun to a specific kind of reload that they do, a specific loading, and in fact, I should say a specific loading out of all the reloads they do. Guys have guns that they only use for competition, only use for hunting rather, only use for combat, zombie apocalypse kind of stuff. Excuse the shooters and victims, as I said, this is a public range. After all, everybody's got to get their training in, right? So, with the process I showed you today, again, very quick, very simple, easy breezy. You can do this on almost any scope out there on the market. Now, of course, as I said, you can adjust this and manipulate this in any which way you want to. As I said, most scopes, in fact, this is the general rule of thumb I follow for scopes, you always want to zero them at 100 yards. Now, there are guys out there that zero them for 50, for even 25. Sometimes they'll even go out and zero them for 200, 300 yards. It's all going to depend on your application, what kind of weapon it's mounted on, what kind of ammunition you're using, so on and so forth. For instance, if this were a long-range DMR rifle and it was shooting 308 or something more powerful, you almost want to zero it for 300 yards because if you're reaching out to an extreme distance, you want to be able to make your adjustments on the fly out to those long ranges that a 5.56 couldn't even dream of touching. For a 5.56, 100 yards is dead on the money, perfect zero, because then you can use your adjustments inside the scope to be able to alter your shots, adjust windage, adjust elevation, adjust travel, adjust for a moving target, so on and so forth, out to about 500 or 600 yards if you know what you're doing and you have the training in with your weapon platform. And also, I said I would make another video on red dots. Red dots are a different animal. Usually with red dots, you want to zero them at about 50 yards. That's my rule of thumb anyway. Guys get zero them, depending on the application, for 25 yards, 20 yards. I know somebody that zeroed them for 15 yards. Then again, he is a SWAT operator, so he's only using that particular gun for very close-in, room-clearing distances. And again, I keep saying this, it's going to depend on your application. Is this a hunting gun? Is it a combat gun? Is it a competition gun? Is it something you take out and plink with for fun on the weekends? It's all going to depend on what you're using it for, at what distance you're planning to use it, before you make your adjustments. Again, quick and dirty, easy breezy today. If you want to see more videos like this, just leave a comment below, leave a like. Heck, if you really like it, come and subscribe. Until next time, folks, stay frosty, my friends.